just to let everyone know, we're going to record this session so that in case we can so we have a record of it, and we'll try to post it on the Iowa section's website so that folks that can view it later.
I see one person listed as guest in the participants. Can I ask who that might be?
Rob, this is Jeff Von Brown. Are you seeing, am I showing up as myself, or could that be me?
No, you are showing up as yourself. I'm trying to see if our other presenter has joined us yet, and that is there is one person that doesn't show up with a name, and I'm hoping it's him. So Jason, are you on the line? Thanks for that offer, Jeff. We might actually have you present first as we get going. I just sent Jason an email to see if he will be joining us. In the meantime, I guess just a couple quick things. ITE Spotlight went out yesterday. The international meeting registration is open. And then there is also an ITE equity listening session that is starting, I think it was tomorrow, if I remember right. And then we are working to set up some other meetings for the coming months. So we look forward to you joining us on those. We're kind of still figuring out what exactly they may be, but we'll get those figured out. Checking the list to see if our other presenter has shown up. I don't see him, so Jeff Von Brown from the IODOT is going to present. We'll have him present first on how the DOT uses Streetlight, and then we have somebody from Streetlight that hopefully will join us soon enough, and he can present on the data and information that they have. So Jeff, you would take it away.
Yeah, certainly. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Maybe I can, well, we'll scroll through this. So thanks for having me. When we had the Movite meeting in Des Moines a few years ago, I'd given kind of a 101 on the use of streetlight, some of the basics and items to pay attention to and pitfalls. But really, I suppose pitfalls isn't fair, but it was here's the strength of the tool, but here's how to use it optimally, because there's a few nuances, data management or mining the data in particular. So today, I just wanted to go over a few of the analyses that we've done in the past year and how that's kind of advanced our use of the tool, as well as our plans for the future and kind of current thoughts on the pros and cons as they stand right now. Let me close that. I created new. Oops. Am I still sharing?
We do not see your screen at the moment.
Okay. Okay. Just a second then. Anyway, while I get this booted up, so I'm Jeff Von Brown. I am head of the modeling, forecasting, and telemetrics group at the Iowa DOT and the Systems Planning Bureau. And of course, you've probably heard that we've done a little reorganization of things as well. And so we've got a few other places underneath and within the division. And so we're hoping that we'll have increased use of the model going forward, and some other ideas to highlight upon. Presentation purpose, like I said, just kind of give some unique analyses to you folks. There's three of them in particular. So traffic estimation for Grand Avenue Extension and names, detour use for I-192 in Louisa County, and US 30 use patterns in eastern Iowa. This slide was included in that presentation at Movite a few years ago of what would we do without streetlight? Well, we do a lot of best judgment estimates, trying to derive patterns either using models or surveys, known pieces of data, but it really didn't get close to giving us that firm idea of just where are people going. You'd get one instance, maybe two instances if it's a cordon study, or if it's a study of a community of people coming in and then where they exit, but what exactly do they do in between? Key question with the long-awaited extension in Ames, of course, for Grand Avenue is, hey, what's this going to do to Duff? What could it do to University? How's it going to be used? It's not a DOT project, of course, but it's the long-awaited project for most DOT employees who have to use US 30 or 35 to get to and from work. And so just as kind of fun, we wanted to see, okay, road's not open yet, so we don't have traffic that is using the future right-of-way, but can we analyze the data to understand who would likely use this? So two parts of that, of course, the streetlight, you're able to take a look at what pass-through traffic is using gates, and we did that as a first step. We identified about 22 likely routes, some fairly weak in assumption and some greater validity in assumption. So, Grand Avenue, just at the north leg of Lincoln Way, just south of the railroad overpass. If traffic had that option at that point to use the extension, as opposed to going to Duff or University to eventually get to US 30 or to get to South 16th, how would they travel? How would they use that? So we came up with a definition of about 11 different points within within street light, calibrated to our own counts, our known counts, to see not only, using the index, which is a normalized set of values that it can give you as results. You're also able to come up with an estimation based off of your own counts of how that index calculates into actual those actual totals that you kind of hard code in to control. Or you can use Streetlight's version of it. Well, we used our own counts, analyzed a few things off tool for these alternatives, and figured out what was likely to use the extension. So just for trips traveling through the area, we had about 4,000 vehicles that we could expect in opening year. The top four, probably not a big surprise: Grand Avenue to US 30, that's that red line there. Number 2, Grand Avenue to University, more orange. Granted, placing these routes on what would be the new alignment. Lincoln Way from the west to US 30, and the Lincoln Way to Southeast 16th. Or for South 16th going east. So people traveling through, part of the definition too is, let's say you have Lincoln Way, the west leg, with University, for traffic that's going to go to the east leg of University and South 16th to go to Vet Med, the mobile home park, the different businesses east and closer to Duff. So we took a look at areas as well as just kind of these gates or these points to get out of our area. But about 4,000 vehicles, and that's in both directions. Well, if that's traffic traveling through the area, what about traffic that's destined to our area? We identified 15 different zones. Blue was primarily business, green had a mix, but was primarily residential in nature. Some of the zones, probably 50-50, or could be labeled the other way, but wanted to do the same thing. What would depend on South 16th, or that the extension might provide an alternative route? And we used gates as we had before, but also the zones as they're kind of drawn here. Estimated off use, or use off of the tool, and came up with about 4,100 vehicles that could be expected. So coupling those two numbers together, about 8,100 vehicles, both directions in, I can't remember if we did 2020 or if we worked off of 2019 counts. But basically today, by the end of this year, when construction should be finished, that's what we could expect. So is that number realistic? Well, it certainly was in the ballpark and was about where I assumed it would be. One person's opinion, of course. So we double checked the Ames area MPO model, and their daily trips was about 7,300. Now, of course, a model isn't a forecast, but at least outside of the box for those results in terms of flow, that's what it had. Of course, there's no adjustment process for a route that doesn't exist because there's no count, but it got us in the area. And if we did 25% plus or minus on that 8,100, 6,000 to 10,000, maybe 10,000 is a little aggressive, but definitely in the ballpark. So that was kind of just a, hey, what do we think about the tool? Let's take a look at questions that we haven't asked before, or that we haven't thought about trying to engage. So we've done some exploration here a little later in 2020 and early 2021. Specific to an actual question is detour use of Iowa 92 in Louisa County. The district had been approached by county staff with concerns over the construction that would take place on 92 between Ainsworth and Columbus Junction. There were some individuals, and I know some people on the call have specific experience with this particular situation. But we had some individuals saying that, hey, your detour is going to take traffic so out of the way, it's unreasonable. Can't we use county roads? And well, there were a lot of issues with, well, there are a lot of intervening routes between blue, which is our normal area, which is going to have construction on it, and then the orange, which is the official designation, but specifically for trucks, there's no good options in between. There's embargoes or there are limits, and just the system in that area is not well built to become the detour, even though it would be much closer. So we wanted to take a look at specifically how did the detour get used before, because there was similar work in the area. And then also, is the traffic that's actually going on 92, is it actually bound for Columbus Junction, or how much is going elsewhere? And we had an assumption that a lot of traffic is actually going towards Muscatine, particularly truck traffic. So let's kind of get an idea and see how much inconvenience for how many people is about to be put on those people's shoulders. So same thing, we took a look at 2019 sample data, calibrated it to our counts, utilized the origin destination tool. And if you recall or aren't familiar, you're able to, and I should explain it for the prior example, when you create gates, or what we showed as dots, you're able to say from this defined zone, if traffic is not originating from it, you'll be able to get a sample of traffic that has passed through that gate one way or the other. And then you define other areas with gates, and you get a matrix more or less of vehicles that pass through any combination of those points. And you can do it by time of day. You could do by day of the week. You could have this calculation done based off of 1 month, 4 months, 12 months of a year, data from 2016 through present. So there's a lot of ways to take a look at things. So in this particular instance, we did have data during the construction last time, which I believe was June to, or May to September, primarily most of the summer last year, if not the year before. So we had a defined period where we knew the detour was in place and traffic was operating not according to normal operations. So the analysis, one of the things that I was very upfront with before, and I definitely think Streetlight is a positive tool and does a lot of things. There are challenges though, and I think part of those are inherent to the state that we live in. So largely rural, and so if you have a rural area or rural population, the real key of this tool is that it's sampling, or it's pulling cell phone company data. It's scrubbed for identifiers, but it's pulling smartphone information where you might have apps or just the cell service itself. It's got those pings, or it's got those pulses of energy that gets recorded, and it gets scrubbed by the cell phone carriers or network providers. And then a sample is given to Streetlight, and then you get a sample of that sample for the conditions that you set up. So how many people have smartphones these days? Probably most of us say that, almost everybody we know who's an adult has a smartphone. Well, it's not always the case. And if you have multiple people per vehicle, or a myriad of other questions, it's probably exacerbated those issues when it comes to a rural area. So that might have been part of our problem here. So the sample characteristics didn't lead to a conclusive answer for the patterns regarding the detour during the time period. We weren't able to say, okay, so construction took place through June through August, or maybe it was May through August. So we had, I recall that 4 or 5 month period, we had 2 solid months to say, okay, we can select June and July, because the whole time the detour is in place, what did traffic do? How did it change? Frankly, it didn't show that the detour was used at all. And well, I'm sure that not everybody used it, especially trucks or larger vehicles who felt that they shouldn't be using gravel roads or local roads or encountering bridges that were not rated appropriately, but we weren't able to get a sufficient impression of how well the detour was used as opposed to the normal route. What we were able to do, though, was establish that, well, 60% of the trucks normally, without the construction, or about 242 of the total, and about 34% of the personal vehicles, about 630, they're traveling to Muscatine or past. So if you're starting at that lower right diamond, the black diamond, and then going to the upper right diamond from Ainsworth to Muscatine, we've got a significant amount of traffic that's just traveling through the area. What does that mean in terms of the detour? Is the detour, very harmful on traffic and what it intends to do? 60% of trucks, that's 10% over half, and 34% of personal vehicles is definitely not half of personal vehicles. But for the people who are making those trips and that might be impacted by the construction, it may or may not increase appreciable drive time. So if the detour is 45 miles, it takes 53 minutes. The normal route is 33 miles and takes 36 minutes. If you're encountering construction, still trying to use that, in the event of during construction conditions, maybe you're 5 to 7, maybe 10 minutes longer by taking the detour. And of course, a detour is known to be, it's not the ideal. It's just an acceptable thing that we have to work with because, a project can't get done in an afternoon. And we try to minimize the pain. So in this particular analysis, we were able to find everything that we wanted to, but still was able to give us some useful information to engage the locals and engage the concerns and try to understand what was going on. The third example, so US 30 and use patterns in eastern Iowa. In terms of projects for the state of Iowa and in history, and it's kind of interesting as we go back and we take a look in the 90s, the DOT certainly had a lot of funds available to look at expansion and looking to bring up and build 4-lane corridors. And so if you've got 163 that goes from Des Moines down to Ottumwa, or we have other areas that kind of jump-started US 20. We were building a lot of expansion or capacity projects, and nowadays we're really in a stewardship mode, and we really take a good look each year at what we have available for funds and what we have requirements to just keep things in a state of good repair. And so back in the 90s, we did identify a lot of corridors and areas that would be good candidates for expansion. And some of those corridors and advocates for those corridors really want to see those projects happen. And if we were to do some of those, it might not be the case where we can do them, but if we do them, it has to be a very focused and good benefit cost analysis for the particular project. So in this case, US 30, we're sandwiched between I-80, and we have certain projects that are programmed to expand that from 4 lanes to 6 lanes, as well as US 20, and with US 20's final 40 in eastern Iowa. US 30 is sandwiched between 2 multi-lane bidirectional facilities across the state. So one of the common questions is that, well, people would like to use US 30, especially in the eastern half of the state, versus I-80. So we kind of wanted to understand, okay, so can we understand how many people might be forced to use I-80 versus US 30? Well, it comes down to preference, so that might be hard, but let's just get an idea of numbers. And then also on the section between the Mount Vernon and Lisbon bypass and then DeWitt, which is currently 2 lanes, how much traffic is actually through traffic, or is it local? So taking a look there. Map here, of course, with the same thing with the diamonds. One thing in particular was, there's a lot of intervening smaller routes, whether they're secondary or primary roads. But if you wanted to go partly on 30 and then drop down to use 80 or the other way around, do any of these get used? As you kind of look at for that second bullet is, will traffic take intervening routes to jump to a preferred route? Same thing here, utilize the OD tool with gates and zones and recorded patterns with gates at each of the system's interchange legs. Not as a big surprise, at least for right now, for traffic. If you've got 4 lanes and you can drive 70 mile per hour, at least the speed limit, people often drive faster as opposed to 55 on a 2-lane. Only 2 of the 32 combinations showed a preference for US 30, and that makes sense as it being, well, from the north leg of US 61 and 80 to the east leg of 30 and 380, and then the reverse. Everybody else was really using I-80 and really multiples over the similar use for US 30. For I-80 to I-380 on that first sub-bullet, the east leg of 80 to the north leg of I-380, 251 times the amount of traffic uses I-80 versus US 30. And so if we were to do anything for that area that might draw other traffic on, it might increase the traffic, but you're pulling away and kind of getting away from one of the other items we're trying to focus on right now. That's right sizing, is working with the limited amount of funds to maintain the integrity and purpose of the system, and the interaction between the two. As much as we want to help economic development and things like that in the areas, there's a stewardship question of funds that needs to be done. And for that question of intervening routes, are people jumping on and off as soon as they can to get between these two diamond points to complete their journeys with what they choose to go on versus what they want to go on? Second part of that was, okay, if we go eastwards from Mechanicsville to DeWitt, after the Mount Vernon Lisbon bypass, how does traffic go? And one thing you'll notice here on this map, there's no such town as Fremont, Springfield, Spring Rock, or Orange. So if you ever use for your presentations, someone might point out to you that Bing Maps, they might have put the township names incorrectly as the community names. So just a little word of warning, as I learned that after I'd created everything. Fremont, Iowa is actually to the southeast of Oskaloosa. So we do have one, it's just not there. That's Stanwood. So for this idea of where are people going to and coming from, I mentioned doing a study, stopping vehicles, asking them where they're going to go, or do a license plate study. That's how you would do this before. But here with Streetlight, of the some 2,900 vehicles entering the west city limits of Mechanicsville, there's really 2 ways to classify how the trips or those vehicles travel. One is exiting in a town. They enter the limits of a town and they don't show up on the other side continuing on the corridor. So in this case, 727 did not continue east, either continuing their trip on another route or stopping in town. And 331 of those 727 did that very thing, I believe, in Mechanicsville, or exiting to rural areas. So between our communities, 444 exited, but once leaving Stanwood, and on this map listed as Fremont, but before getting to Clarence, or just traveling the corridor. So 378 left the corridor at US 61, which is roughly 13%. So it is very much a local route. If it were to be improved like the US 30 Coalition would like it to be, it could improve, it could increase. We certainly did analysis doing an extensive Pell on the US 30 corridor and taking a look at what could future use mean if I-80 is not improved, or if a Super 2 or a 4-lane is done here. And current counts right now go anywhere from, in the 2000s to the 7000s. And by 2040, it might be up to 5,000 to 10,000, still below the thresholds of what we would normally consider the action point at which, by volume alone, a 4-lane would be needed. And we're currently pursuing Super 2 alternatives for passing lanes. One's programmed for the eastern edge of the study area, and another one somewhat more in the middle. And I think there's 5 to 8 or so pairs that are planned for the project, and that's currently what we're proceeding with. So those were examples of just, hey, as opposed to who's going from A to B, or using for travel demand model validation to understand, okay, so from the Hiawatha area of the corridor MPO, Cedar Rapids, Hiawatha, Marion, how many people go from Hiawatha to Marion versus other areas, which we had been doing in the past. Some new things and some kind of exciting things. That's all based on the essentials tier, and I don't know if the representative has talked to you before or has gone over what's available. There's 3 tiers, and the bottom one is called the essentials, and that's what we've had for a number of years. Primarily what I just showed here, the origin destination of creating those gates and then getting a matrix that says people are traveling between this gate and this gate. Here's how many, the time of day. You might even have descriptors saying what's the trip length, the demographics of the people, the possible trip purpose based off of the geospatial information of the origin or destination, particularly if it's a zone rather than a pass-through gate, zone activity, or count estimation. We're currently we're gonna start a demo next week, actually, and the next 2 tiers as we're evaluating what we do. Some of the additional things there would be of interest would be select link analysis. So if we chose a segment on I-35 between Ames and Des Moines, and we ran the analysis for our time period, we'd be able to see for that single trip before somebody stops their vehicle for 5 minutes or more, the trips coming to and going past that point, and kind of see the travel shed of where people are, who uses it. Top routes, which is interesting, which you can do rather manually, which is between 2 known points that you've defined. What are the top routes between those 2 points? So one of those questions is, if we have, I live in Ankeny, let's say, kind of west central Ankeny. I could go up through to County Road R17. I could go on US 69, or I could go on I-35. Well, how many people are using those 3 routes based on conditions of defined points, something like that, and it would give a very nice graphical visualization. They've worked a lot on their tools online. Bike and pedestrian tools and transit tools, both these are really kind of the same in what they're able to do. It's not necessarily going to give you a count, from what I understand, and we'll be testing it out, but it'll give you index values that you can apply to known counts, or kind of understand the travel shed of particular transit stops, or if you have a link on a trail, where are those people coming to and going from, who's using what trailheads. Granted, it's all sampling, and it's all sampling in a much smaller population. And but we're gonna check it out and see, definitely with bicycle and pedestrian, for safety, or for if it eventually gets to the point where doing counts, it becomes obsolete. That's one thing that we had been engaged by Streetlight about in the beginning when they were looking at their count estimation. Is, hey, we've gathered information from your ATR sites, and through machine learning, we've got to this point of figuring out that we're able to estimate counts with this level of confidence, and so on. And at first it needed improvement, but as machine learning happens and the greater data that's added into it and it learns, it's gotten better. Well, will we get there to use that for other items? Maybe, maybe not. One example I don't have on here, I had worked with, there was a known count done in 2019 outside of Decorah for a consultant. Well, they wanted to go back for a traffic impact study and expand to 2 adjacent intersections. Well, those were not counted, but we decided let's get streetlight data for all 3, see how far off or how different the count was with the location that we had data on, to appreciate the difference, and then come up with a proxy value as an estimate for those 2 other locations. So that's one thing that we had worked on. And of course, the last bullet here, if you're working on a DOT project, you might be able to have access to the tool, and we certainly might be able to take a look at it. We do have the ability to take a look at and kind of craft our contract and some of the terms. And I had already engaged a number of individuals who actively use the tool per projects that you've got with us. And so if anybody else on the call, and I've got my contact information at the end, if you're excited, or, yep, you guys should get the best tier, it doesn't hurt for me to be able to say that consultants A, B, C, and D are on board, because it brings value for them. One of the last slides is the things that we've currently performed and possible in the future. Kind of gone over them, but in particular for you consultants out there, we've used it for weaving patterns, replacing travel surveys, the before and after construction performance. We have another consultant who had mentioned part of their contract was looking at the before and after of some signal work. And they have the actual counts, but it would be interesting to see what Streetlight says for that specific time period as well. We haven't gotten around to be able to do that, but before and after estimation, possible analyses in the future. The next tier up, what's called the advanced analytics, they have 15-minute peak hour bins, and they have specific days that you can record. Now, specific days versus all Mondays within a month, that's very different. The sample size might be smaller, but of course, a peak hour does not adhere to 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, 7 to 8, and so forth. So down to the 15-minute peak hour bin would be very big, with a lot of work that you folks do for us. And then also, disruptions to environmental justice, incidents and the disruption from incidents or detour routes, a lot of those items that we've never really looked at before. And whether it was because we hadn't thought about it, or we had other tools to take a look at, like INREX and our traffic operations center. But there's new possibilities here to take a look at in the future. Appreciate your time. Let me know if there's any questions, can certainly answer them, whether it's our contract going forward and questions on use or being able to utilize that. Generally, it has to be a DOT project or DOT right-of-way. But I'd be happy to hear anything here, or if we don't have any time later, or through email. And here's my contact information.
If anybody has questions for John or Jeff right now, you can turn your mic on and ask. If not, we will move on to our next presenter, and we can have questions later too. So I'll give you a couple of minutes here if somebody has anything.
Hey Jeff, I got a quick one for you.
Sure.
I don't think you mentioned that you had tested out some turning movement stuff on a study in Decorah. What?
Yeah.
How close did that end up getting, and were you able to use that and then do those other intersections with the streetlight data?
Yeah. Actually, I never heard back from the person we were working with. I'll have to check back. One of the strengths and challenges that we've realized from the tool is that, especially if it's an index value that it gives you back, and let's say at the southern limits of Decorah, you've got 10,000 as your index score, and it's not a vehicle count, but it's a meaningful number. The tool will come back and say, if you've defined certain areas, you could say, oh, we've got 7,000 turning this way. It could say you've got 1 turning this way. And so on a normalized scale, it goes through a QC process to give you results, but can you really rely on anything that's under 10? Can you really rely on anything that is of such a small magnitude? And the answer that I've gotten back is, well, you just kind of have to, you got to get a gut feel for it, and hopefully you've got a certain degree of working knowledge, and I'm sure that they're improving upon that as well. So yeah, I'd be interested to see, because it's a sample of whatever population. If you define a study area with movements or points that there's not enough data, it might come back as flagged as it's insufficient. There's insufficient scale to return results. We were able to get results for that instance, and I think it was a business park around the Toppling Goliath brewery. So they weren't heavily trafficked areas, but we were able to get those results back. Yeah, I'll have to check with our consultant that I was working with to get that data to see how it turned out.
Cool, thanks.
One thing, this is Martin Murray with Streetlight, and one thing I would add on to that response, Jeff, is that we do return the sample size for each project you run. So it can be useful to go in there and see how many devices and how many trips were pulled for that specific intersection that you're doing a turning movement count on. And then maybe if your sample is low, you can expand the time period to include a whole year of data or 2 years of data, something like that, rather than just like 1 month or something like that. So that can be very useful to kind of measure the reasonableness of the results you're getting from Streetlight.
Yeah, and it's definitely a case where most of us internally, and we engaged all the different areas to say, hey, we've got this tool. Let's say you don't have to worry about running the tool. What's the interest, so that we could gauge that and then possibly have systems planning be kind of the point for analyses. Yeah, if you run something, part of the criteria is it's probably good to run at least 3 times, because you are taking a sample. I think I've read in the Streetlight literature, but also, yeah, expanding the time period, changing things. The base level only allows you 4 months of the year, but if you do that March, April, September, and October, those are probably the best to get you the typical year. Quotations, that it takes out the peaks and valleys of the summer and wintertime months. All right. Well, thanks everybody. If you have any questions, you got my contact information. Thanks for letting me present.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate you presenting today and the information you presented. And thanks for stepping up with our little technical difficulty that we had. We were struggling to get Streetlight personnel connected. They are now, and I think, Martin, are you going to be presenting for Streetlight?
Yes, I have a short demo I can perform for you folks, so I can take the screen here. Okay. Rob, can you just confirm with me that you can see my Streetlight Insight platform on the screen share?
I can see it.
Perfect. So what we're looking at here is our Streetlight Insight platform. And when you subscribe with Streetlight or you work with the Iowa DOT on an analysis, you gain access to this platform where you can iterate over your analyses and input your geographies of interest and work with and manipulate your results. So in this case, the input that I've added here are these 3 gates on bridges in downtown Des Moines with the purpose of understanding who's using each of these bridges, where are they coming from, where are they going. And a little hard to see on the left, but I've also included both eastbound and westbound directions for all of these bridges. So I'll just select Grand westbound, and I'll show my results here. So the this project type is called Origin Destination to Preset Geography. And what this is doing is a scan for all trips that cross our Grand Avenue westbound. What is their destination? And these are census block groups here that we're showing the destination for. So this can be helpful for one thing. It's truly a scan out. There's no region locking. If there are trips coming from across the border in other states, you're able to understand those trip movements with this analysis. And then we're also able to see the volume going to each of these census locations. And if I turn on the 3D visualizations, you can see what the kind of top destinations are for this specific bridge and folks taking it going westbound. So this is really kind of a high-level origin destination. It's really useful for users to be able to just input a single zone or highlight a single road segment on a roadway and just get a very high-level context for folks using this roadway, where are they coming from, where are they going. And kind of a different look at origin destination. This is our top routes analysis type, but something similar could easily be done in the essentials tier with an origin middle filter destination project type. But essentially what I've done here is I've input the two roads. I actually live in Davenport, Iowa, so I was really just trying to understand and explore my local area a little bit more. And when I am driving to Moline across the border, I really wanted to understand what bridges are being used for local trips going to and from Moline and Davenport here. And so these green bars that you see raised are the various bridges in between Davenport and Moline, and getting an understanding of which of these bridges is being used the most and how that changes over time. So running this analysis 2019 versus 2020 to understand maybe COVID impacts, or one of these bridges, I-74, was undergoing some construction last year, and being able to look at how many people are taking the detour on 74 versus how many are taking just rerouting to a completely different bridge. So I'll pause there real quick just to highlight those two analyses. And I wanted to see if there's any kind of questions about these results, or any questions about how we input these zones into the platform that you're seeing here. Maybe none at this time, but definitely don't hesitate to interrupt me as I go through these. Definitely feel free to ask questions so you can get the most out of this demo. And so I know we have a limited amount of time, so I'll just touch on our turning movement counts next. And so turning movements is a very basic origin destination within the platform, and we run an OD where we have our 4 cardinal directions on the intersection here. And we're able to understand both the distribution for, I'll just open the whole matrix. So folks coming westbound into the intersection on Locust Street, how many of them take each of these turning movements. And if you download the metrics, you can get a CSV with results that can make it very easy to integrate with other systems you have, and take that hourly or even 15-minute bins to really look at and visualize how the travel changes throughout the day and how it interacts with this intersection. And then another thing I've turned on here is our trip and traveler attributes. So being able to say, folks utilizing this intersection, what are some of the demographics of those travelers? So traffic by education, family status, income, race, and trip purpose. Trip purpose can be particularly helpful, being able to find home-based work, home-based other, and non-home-based travelers using this intersection. And you can see how that sort of changes throughout the day. When we're looking at the peak AM period, we have an increase in the amount of home-based work travelers. You can see about 33% of folks using this intersection during our peak period of 6 AM to 10 AM are home-based trips going to work. We also do provide traveler attributes as well. And in this case, duration, length, of course, these metrics won't be too useful in a turning movement count, but in other projects like the corridor studies that Jeff was discussing earlier, these metrics can be much more helpful. So duration, length, speed, and circuity. Circuity is something of an interesting metric. It's a comparison of the length of the trip compared to the length A to B as the crow flies, so to speak. So a really large circuity score would be somebody circling the block looking for parking. And then last thing I'll show here, we don't have our 15-minute bins turned on, but we can see the distribution of folks using this intersection and as it changes throughout the time of day. So those are the kind of brief demonstration I had prepared for our time here today. Are there any questions I could answer, or are there any kind of use cases that I haven't touched on that you think might be interesting to take a look at? I might have them already prepared within the platform here.
I got a question for you. Do you have with any of your demo stuff, any of that pedestrian and bike stuff that was mentioned earlier?
Awesome question. Yes, I do. I don't think I have anything local to Iowa, unfortunately. So I will just share something that I have from Colorado.
And while you're pulling that up, I just had another quick question on the demographic stuff that you were showing. Is that just sort of using the census data, like looking at where the origins and destinations were based on the census data, and then that's what's being used to give those metrics?
Almost. It's not the origins and destinations being used. We actually tag each device with a probable home location. So we'll see that a device is sitting in the same spot from, say, 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. 5 nights a week, and then we'll tag that home location with the census level demographics that go along with that census block group. So it is inferred data. We're not capturing any data from the device specifically that would invade people's privacy. So it is all inferred demographics from the census.
Okay, thanks for that.
And per your request, here's a pedestrian activity grid that I've created in Broomfield, Colorado here. And so for this analysis, I've just quickly made these hexagon grids in QGIS and uploaded that shapefile within the platform. And what's nice about this analysis is being able to really highlight where, at a high level, you can even run this for an entire city or a county. Part of the benefits of a regional subscription is being able to do scans like this and use hundreds or over 1,000 zones even in order to get a really high level picture of what kind of activity is going on. So these 1 kilometer grids are intended to give us some understanding of pedestrian activity in each of these grids. This can be helpful for just at a high level understanding pedestrian exposure, where pedestrians are heavily concentrated, maybe at some street crossings, and you can prioritize pedestrian or bicycle improvements based on that. So, you know, how you set up and run an analysis with bike and pedestrian and trucks and rail and bus, it's very similar to how you set it up with vehicles, and the outputs are, you know, designed to be very similar as well, where you can download and use them in a way that you're familiar with if you have past experience with the platform. So in this case, you know, doing this high-level activity analysis on pedestrians, we can take a look at what some of our top generators of pedestrian activity are. I believe this is a Walmart. Yeah, it's a Walmart. And some of the other areas of interest in Broomfield here. Any other questions or anything I can answer for people while we wrap up here? I know
I had a question about the data that you provide. As we would probably all agree, different driver populations, there's different rates of cell phone ownership and cell phone usage and keeping it in the vehicle with them. So does your company already like upscale the data based on those assumptions, or do you provide methods to, you know, make those adjustments by DOTs that are interested in that?
Great question. So for vehicles, we do provide something of a national calibration factor, where we take counts from over 10,000 different permanent counters from all across the country, mostly publicly available DOT counts, on all different types of roadways in order to make a national calibration factor for each different type of roadway across different types of locations. So we do provide that scale up nationally. However, you know, there are situations where you can, like a common one is near bus or rail depots, where the results can be slightly impacted by high occupancy vehicles moving through there. And somewhat similar to the scenario Jeff discussed, where we're looking at a few different intersections, Streetlight does allow you to input local calibration data. So if you come in here and create a new zone, you can draw a gate on a roadway. And so in this, I'll just quickly show you an example. Let's say we have a count on I-80 here from the DOT. We can draw a gate over that I-80 and then input the count that we're getting from the DOT, whatever that may be. And so this is how the platform facilitates using a local calibration factor. So if Jeff had a count from one of the intersections, he can input that intersection as a calibration count, and then the other intersections will calibrate to that local count that Jeff provided.
Great. And then is it assumed that any stop longer than 5 minutes is not counted as a through trip? Is that the threshold?
That is the threshold, yes. And you know, frankly, the 5 meters and 5 minutes is something of an arbitrary number that we need to use in order to end the trip, you know, somewhere. We very commonly have done custom projects where we will influence that 5 meters and 5 minute rule. Probably the most common is thinking about truck tours. So, you know, port to final destination, we can change that 5 meters and 5 minutes on a custom basis to 15, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever the kind of the needs of the project require. And it is something that we're looking to building into the product in the future. It's not something that we're going to input in the next, you know, 1 or 2 quarters, but I'm hoping that by the end of this year, we'll have, at least in beta, some version of being able to do that within the platform and change those trip ending criteria. So maybe something to look forward to. But for now, the default in the platform is ending a trip if it moves no more than 5 meters in 5 minutes, or if we identify a trip, a mode change. So a shift from vehicle to pedestrian will also end a trip as well. Any other questions that I can answer before we hop off here? I know we're a little bit over. I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
No, actually, we're okay. Our meeting's scheduled for until 1:30. So
Oh, sorry about that.
No, we kind of gave you and Jeff a bit of a timeline so that we could keep some time for questions. So if there are other questions, please ask. I guess I had a question about the gates. I noticed when you drew the one on the screen right now, you drew it quite kind of quickly. Does the gate size make a difference? And a little bit of that is maybe related to the data that you're getting. How do they tie together?
Great question. So what you're seeing here on our screen is, well, it's a Google Maps API, so it's very similar to what you're looking at in Google Maps. You can search in here like in Google Maps, but what's really important are these pink lines on the screen, and that's our OpenStreetMaps layer. So really, as long as, in this case, as long as you're covering these pink lines, it doesn't really matter the shape or size of the polygon. We could draw it very, very small if we wanted to. We could draw a triangle for some reason. But as long as the platform is locking all of these trips to these pink lines, so as long as you're capturing those pink lines in some way, you can draw a direction here. So if we want to draw like westbound traffic, we can do that. So those are for non-pass-through zones, and I guess I should mention that we do have something of slightly different rules for what we call non-pass-through zones. So a non-pass-through zone would be something that we're looking for a trip start or trip stop in this area. So I'm just going to draw one here. Now these non-pass-through zones can be any shape or size, but if you go too small, we will flag it as we might be concerned about sample size. And sample size really is the limiting factor there. You can draw a very small zone, but if it's in an area that receives lots of traffic, like there are very small zones in an urban area that seem to make sense if you're covering just one building, but it's a commercial center that gets a lot of traffic, that'll be fine. But if we're only seeing less than about 100 devices interacting with your zone through your study period, we may not return results for that because we don't want to, again, invade anyone's privacy. Privacy is a very important concern to us at Streetlight, and we have lots of protections in the platform to protect users' privacy.
Thank you.
Hi, I've got a quick question. Is Iowa DOT has a subscription? Is that subscription available to local agencies in Iowa?
I'm not sure about the details of the contract. I would need to go back and look. I know that any of the local agencies could ask the DOT to run something for them, and the DOT is not, we allow the DOT to share results with any municipality within the state or any consultants, and we don't put a limit on the sharing of results. I'm not sure if they can log in. I would need to double check and look at the contract for that, but there is a way for them to get results from this, but maybe Jeff knows a little bit more than I do on that.
All right, thank you.
It appears Jeff has left the meeting, so you might have to reach out to him directly. we have a little bit of time left. So if there are additional questions, please speak up. If not, in the chat, there is a link for you to go to complete a form in order to get PDHs for the meeting today. And then I guess I will follow up with a few announcements. I misspoke as far as the dates at the beginning of the meeting. The tomorrow date was Vision Zero Sandbox competition deadline for ITE. And then the ITE equity listening sessions start next week on April 22nd.
I just did a little looking at our platform, and it does not appear that any users not from Iowa DOT or a consultant are added to the account. So I don't think the local municipalities have access, but that is something that we've negotiated with other DOTs. For example, Minnesota DOT, a lot of the counties have access through that platform, and some of the MPOs as well. So yeah, it can vary state to state, but it does not appear that Iowa at this time allows local municipalities to have access.
Well, I guess not hearing any other questions. Martin, thank you for your time today and presenting your information. It was great to hear from Streetlight and what can be accomplished through other forms of data collection than what we would consider traditional. We appreciate you presenting on that today. Not hearing any other questions, I guess we can end the meeting a little bit early and let people get back to their day. So thank you for attending today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.